Welcome to Brandon Stark, the boy who climbed. A Game of Thrones story. From his first step to his final climb, this is the untold journey of young Brandon Stark. A tale of wonder, defiance, and destiny, set in the shadows of Winterfell's towering walls before the push that changed everything. Written by Brian M. Brumbaugh. Narrated by Rory Smith. Let the climb begin. Chapter 1. First steps. Bran age 2. The godswood was frozen, not in the way of a hard frost or a new snowfall, but in the way of deep northern stillness, where silence settled over stone and branch like a second layer of snow. Even the red leaves of the heart tree seemed stiff with cold, swaying only when the wind insisted. Catelyn Stark stood beside the old weirwood tree, wrapped in fur and tension. In her arms, Rickon slept, pink-cheeked and tiny, his breath puffing warm against her chest. Across the godswood, Eddard Stark knelt beside a boy. Bran. 2 years old, barely speaking full sentences, hair messy as wolf fur, eyes wide and blue and watching the snow fall like magic. He gripped Ned's gloved fingers, wobbling on legs like kindling. Go on then, Ned said softly. No better place to start walking than beneath a heart tree, Bran's first climb. His feet stumbled forward. A shuffle, a pause. Then 2 real steps, then 3. He wobbled, froze, arms pinwheeling, and didn't fall. He took a 4th, then a 5th, and looked up at his father as if demanding witness. Ned smiled. You're a Stark now. Bran squealed and half ran the last 2 paces into Ned's arms. Catelyn smiled despite herself. Don't encourage him, she called. He'll be climbing the walls by spring. Ned stood, hoisting Bran into the crook of his arm. That's the idea, the boys. By midday, Bran was back in the Great Hall, surrounded by chaos. Robb Stark, his eldest brother, had built a fortress out of firewood and bearskin rugs. Theon Greyjoy had claimed it as his own, declaring himself king of the rug keep. Jon Snow, quiet as ever, leaned against the window seat, reading a book he didn't seem to enjoy. Your reign ends here, Greyjoy, Robb said, charging with a carved wooden sword. You'll have to pry it from my cold iron-born hands. Robb tackled Theon. They rolled into a heap. Bran, watching from a bench, clapped wildly. Then, without a word, he slipped down and began climbing onto the table, gripping the edge, hoisting his knees with effort and grit. When he made it to the top, he stood tall, arms wide. Rug King, he shouted. Climb too, Robb froze. No, Bran, get down. Before anyone could move, Catelyn swept in like a northern storm, lifted Bran off the table and back onto the floor. Down is where you belong, she muttered, hugging him tightly, then setting him on his feet. No more of that, Bran giggled, and promptly tried to climb back up. The girls. That evening, Sansa sat in her favourite spot near the hearth, threading blue ribbon through her doll's hair. Lady needs curls, she said, adjusting the strands. Proper curls. A doll doesn't need anything, Arya grumbled, sitting on the floor cross-legged, chewing on a strip of jerky. She's made of wood. She's a lady, Arya. And you shouldn't chew like a stable boy. You fight like a goose. Girls, Catelyn warned, not looking up. Arya leaned closer to Bran, who now sat beside her with 2 wooden blocks. You like dolls, Bran? Bran blinked, then shook his head. Climb, Arya beamed. Good boy, the warning. That night, Ned stood at the window in their bedchamber, arms crossed, watching snow fall in slow silence across the bailey. He's bold, he said. Catelyn sat on the edge of the bed, nursing Rickon, her hair down and eyes tired. He's reckless. That's when it begins, she said. All of it. I've seen the way he looks at stairs. At ledges? Even the kennel ramp? Ned turned, smiling faintly. You want him to crawl until he's 10. I want him alive until he's 10. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. He's Stark blood. He'll climb, yes, but he'll learn to land on his feet. The roof. 2 days later, Bran was missing. Catelyn found him on the low rooftop outside the armory. Not alone. Jon Snow sat beside him, his cloak wrapped half around Bran's shoulders, both boys watching a raven on a weather vane. He climbed out the window, Jon said simply. I tried to stop him. Then I thought, I should wait. Catelyn said nothing at first. Then, you could have called someone. Jon looked up at her with those same dark eyes that had always been too old for his face. No one would have reached him in time. The dream. That night, Bran dreamed of flying. Not falling, flying. He soared over Winterfell, over the towers, over the gates, past the walls. He saw the whole of the castle, tiny, intricate, alive. He looked down and saw Robb laughing, Jon training, Theon brooding, Sansa twirling, Arya climbing trees, Rickon wailing. He looked beyond the wall, past the woods, past the mountains, towards something cold, something white. A voice called to him, not words, just calling. He woke in sweat and shadow. The promise. Winterfell slept beneath a blanket of new snow. The world was silent, except for Bran Stark, who stood in the shadows of the inner courtyard, staring up at the broken tower, the highest point, the place no one touched. His hand gripped the stone. He said nothing, and then he walked back inside, snow crunching under his feet. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow I climb. Final line. He had taken his first steps. Now he was ready to take the world. Chapter 2. The cracks in the wall. Winterfell. 1 year later. Bran was 3, and he had already fallen in love with the sky. Not the stars, not the moon, though he knew their names and shapes from old Nan's stories, but the space between things, the gap between ledges, the silent call of every windowsill, broken wall and crooked branch. And Winterfell, in all its crumbling grey glory, was a kingdom of spaces just waiting to be bridged, the ladder of stones. There was a part of the keep where the stone had split years ago. Bran had heard Robb say it happened during Robert's rebellion when dragonfire still made people nervous. The crack ran like a scar down the back wall of the bell tower, where the moss grew thick and the ivy coiled like green rope. Bran had found it by accident. He'd been chasing Arya, who was faster and dirtier and not afraid of worms, when he saw the wall's edge. She'd slipped through the servant's door and vanished, but Bran had frozen. Not out of fear, out of fascination. Between the stones were tiny outcroppings, just big enough for feet, or fingers, or the toe of a snow-stained boot if you leaned in close enough. It looked like a ladder. His very first climb. Ned's quiet gaze. That evening he told his father what he'd found. I could climb it, father, he said over supper, voice sticky with honey and bread. I could get all the way to the top. I saw it. Ned Stark, Warden of the North, didn't flinch. He set down his cup slowly, his expression unreadable behind that long black beard. You saw it, he repeated. Bran nodded vigorously. It's like a ladder, and the stones are shaped just right. Sansa sighed. You'll fall and break your face. Arya smirked. He'll break something. Catelyn looked up from feeding Rickon, who was now 1.5 and throwing peas with impunity. Bran, you shouldn't be climbing. You're too small. I'm not, he protested. I've grown. You have, Ned said softly, watching his son with that calculating quiet that made most men nervous. And what happens if the stones are wet? Or if one breaks beneath you? I'll be careful, Bran replied. You won't always be careful. That's not how boys are. Bran hesitated. Then Ned leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. If you want to climb, learn how to fall. Lessons from Jon Snow. It was Jon who showed him how to fall. They practiced in the hayloft behind the stables, where the snow blew in sideways, and the horses stamped and breathed clouds. Jon was 8, but carried the gravity of someone older. He didn't laugh much, not like Theon, who was loud and smug and proud of how good he was at everything. Jon talked with patience, not pride. "You roll when you hit," he explained, crouching. "Tuck your arm, protect your neck. If you land hard, let it move through you." Bran followed, copying the movement. His knees scraped on the wood, but he didn't cry. They did it again, and again, until Bran could drop from a stack of barrels and bounce to his feet. Jon smiled, just barely. Now, climb, a pact between brothers. Robb caught them that evening, snow sticking in his coppery hair, cheeks flushed from sword drills with Sir Roderick. "Jon, if he dies, I'm telling father." Jon shrugged. "Then he'll know Bran died doing what he wanted." Bran didn't die. He climbed that ladder of stone the next morning. 3 stories up, fingers white with cold, knees shaking, he touched the ivy-coated edge of the bell tower and let out a laugh that echoed across the courtyard. "Below," Robb cursed. Jon grinned, and from a window on the 2nd level, Catelyn Stark screamed. The wolf pack grows. That year was the year the pups were named. The direwolves had grown fast. Shaggy Dog was already the size of a pony and as untamed as Rickon's temper. Grey Wind ran faster than any hound in the kennels, and Lady had already bitten a maid who tried to braid her tail. Bran's wolf, Summer, was quiet, pale-eyed, and ever-watching. He followed Bran like a shadow. Where Bran climbed, Summer stood guard. When Bran slipped, Summer barked. Once, when Theon Greyjoy tried to shove Bran off the battlement for a laugh, Summer growled loud enough to freeze Theon mid-sentence. Bran never forgot it. Tales by firelight. At night, old Nan's stories grew darker. She spoke of the long night and children with black eyes who never aged, of stone kings and ghosts beneath the wall. But Bran only half listened now. He was busy drawing maps. On parchment stolen from Maester Luwin's supply, Bran sketched the angles of towers, the lines of rooftops, and the shortcuts between chimney stacks. He called it the Sky Road. By the time he was 4, he knew every tower in Winterfell, every ledge, every hidden walkway. Except one, the broken tower. It stood near the Maester's turret, leaning just slightly to the east, where the stone had cracked and sagged with age. No one used it. No torches burned there. The windows were bricked shut from the inside. Arya said ghosts lived there. Sansa said it was cursed. Theon said it was where Lord Rickon had gone mad. Bran stared at it every day from the rookery, his hand resting on Summer's back. "One day," he told himself, "one day I'll climb that tower. Not yet. But soon. Final line. You won't always be careful. That's not how boys are." Eddard Stark. Then learn how to fall. Jon Snow. Chapter 3. The Wolf and the Wind. The wind howled across the battlements like an old ghost, curling past the stone like it remembered the shape of the dead. Bran clung to the merlon with his mittens clenched, grinning into the icy gust that bit at his cheeks. He was 4 years old now, and he'd climbed higher than he ever had before. From here, the world was wide. He could see the godswood, still and dark with its weirwood tree in slumber. The stables where Hoder, always gentle, always smiling, was brushing down the horses with old Nan humming nearby. The training yard echoed with the ringing of steel on steel as Jon and Robb sparred under Sir Roderick's watchful eye. And far below, in the main courtyard, Maester Luwin was gently coaxing Arya to sit still as he inspected a scraped knee, while she protested like a cornered cat. Theon leaned against a post nearby, smirking as usual, one hand resting lazily on his hip. Bran saw everything, and no one saw him. He was the shadow above Winterfell. He liked to imagine himself as Sir Galadon of Morn, the hero from old Nan's stories. The brave knight who had climbed the tallest tower in the land with nothing but bare hands and a heart full of fire to rescue a princess made of stars. Except Bran didn't want to rescue a princess. He wanted to see the dragons. Not real dragons, though he asked Maester Luwin about them nearly every day. But he liked to imagine they were out there, just beyond the clouds, sleeping in mountain tops or soaring over the narrow sea. He lifted one arm as if it held a sword. He pointed it to the east, toward the mountains, and shouted into the roaring sky, "Ride, men of the north! For Winterfell!" His voice vanished into the wind like a leaf. He laughed anyway. The stones beneath his boots were slick with frost, but he had learned how to lean with the wall, how to move like the crows did. Every step up was a step into a world no one else could reach. He took a careful step to the next parapet gap, and then the wind shifted. His balance wobbled. His heart slammed. For the first time, he teetered, just for a breath. Then a shadow moved behind him. Bran turned, startled, to find Summer. The white direwolf pup had grown faster than Bran could believe. Still not full-grown, but already longer than Hoda's arm. Summer's pale eyes were locked on him. The beast stood 2 paces behind, on the same narrow ledge, perfectly balanced, tail curled like a banner caught in wind. Bran froze. "Summer," he whispered. The direwolf didn't move. Then Bran inched back toward the window where he'd first climbed out. The stone underfoot was narrower now, icy. His foot slipped, only slightly, but it was enough for Summer to lunge, not at him, but next to him. Summer's body crashed into Bran's side, pushing him flat against the stone. The wolf stood over him like a wall of muscle and fur, shielding him from the wind. Bran blinked up, wide-eyed. The snow stung his face, but he was safe. "Good boy," he whispered, arms around Summer's neck. He didn't even remember crawling back inside, just the warm lick on his cheek, the smell of wolf and snow, then the feeling of being small again. Later that evening, Bran sat at the long table with the rest of the Stark children, his cheeks still pink, his tunic freshly changed. Catelyn had not yelled, but she had said his name like it had weight to it. "Brandon Stark," she had whispered, brushing snow from his brow. "You are not a bird. You were not made to fly." Ned had only stood in the corner, arms folded, silent as always. But Bran had seen the ghost of a smile behind his beard. Now, the feast hall crackled with the warmth of roasted meat and pine logs. Arya stabbed her turnips with far too much enthusiasm. Sansa recited a poem she'd written to the delight of Septa Mordain. Robb and Jon traded stories of sword drills with flushed excitement. Bran watched them all, but mostly he watched his wolf. Summer lay under the table at his feet, curled like a sentry with eyes never closed. His tail flicked at the sound of footsteps. His breath was steady. "He knew I was going to fall," Bran whispered to no one. Jon heard him. "They always know. Did ghosts save you too?" Bran asked, eyes wide. Jon nodded. "He saved me before I knew I needed it." Bran looked down at Summer. "Is that what they do?" "Maybe," Jon said. "Maybe that's what we're for, too." That night, Bran lay awake in his bed, the furs pulled up to his chin. Summer slept near the hearth, his breathing slow and even. Outside the window, the trees swayed in the wind, and snow drifted like ash. Bran stared at the ceiling, imagining towers of glass and wings of shadow. He imagined himself flying, not falling, but soaring. Then, somewhere in the dark corners of his half-sleep, a voice began calling his name. Not his mother's, not his father's. It was soft, old, and deep, like roots in winter. And then, just for a moment, he saw a raven with 3 eyes. Final line. And when Bran woke the next morning, the first thing he did was ask Hodor to help him reach the tallest tower in Winterfell. Chapter 4. Eyes Like the Moon. Winterfell, year 296 AC. The snow had stopped falling, but the bite of winter still clung to the stone. Frost slicked the battlements and glimmered on the raven banners that hung limp above the gatehouse. In the rare stillness between storms, Winterfell felt ancient again, not merely old, but timeless, like something carved out of the bones of the earth. Brandon Stark, 5 and feral, crouched in the ruins of the old sept. His breath fogged in the cold, his knees were dirty, and a loose strap on his boot flapped against stone as he shifted his stance. In his right hand he held a splintered stick like a sword. In his left, a candle stub, its wax long hardened. He was alone. At least, he thought so, the whispering walls. The sept had been abandoned since before his birth. Its roof sagged in places, and mould crept like ivy over the walls, but Bran found it beautiful. Sacred in a way the gods would wasn't. Quieter, somehow. The air inside was thick with a kind of hush, as though the walls were listening. He tiptoed between the shattered statues of the 7, running a finger along their weathered faces. The warrior's jaw was broken off. The father's eyes had gone hollow. The mother still smiled, but it was a sad smile, one that seemed to know things children shouldn't. Do you think the gods ever talk to each other? Bran whispered, lighting the candle and placing it at the base of the crone. Do they argue? He imagined the crone scolding the stranger for being too grim, while the smith muttered about broken things no one bothered to fix. The warrior would boast, and the maiden would sigh. And somewhere, the old gods watched from their tree, unmoving and quiet. Bran liked the idea of gods having arguments. It made them feel closer. Voices in the wind. Outside, the clang of swords rang out from the yard. Robb and Jon were sparring again, their grunts sharp between strikes. Theon's laughter carried over the wind, mocking them both from a bench near the kennels. Arya had tried to join them, of course, but Sir Roderick had sent her away. Again. Too small, too wild, too... everything. She hits harder than Theon, Jon had muttered under his breath once. Bran believed him. Now Arya sat alone on the steps of the rookery, chin in her palms, a frown pressed deep into her face. When Bran emerged from the sept, candle wax still smudged on his fingers, she looked up. "Where were you?" she asked, already suspicious. "In the sept. You're not supposed to go in there. I wasn't alone," he said, smug. "The gods were there." Arya rolled her eyes. "Bet they're bored of you by now. I don't fall," he said abruptly. "What?" Bran looked up at the tower above them. "Everyone says I'll fall someday." "I won't," Arya stood. "That's stupid. You're stupid. You're shorter." They glared at each other until they both cracked grins. Bran turned and ran, fast as his legs would carry him, toward the back wall of the rookery tower. It had a rough groove of bricks that made the perfect ladder, if you knew where to put your hands. Arya didn't chase him. Not this time. The climb and the crow. Halfway up the tower, Bran paused. The wind was stronger now, tugging at his cloak. Below, Summer circled, tail wagging uneasily. The direwolf pup had grown faster than Bran expected. Lean, sharp, and quiet. His eyes were pale gold, like moonlight over fresh snow. Bran reached the top and swung himself over the edge of the roof. From here, the castle looked like a game board scattered with playing pieces. Smoke curled from the kitchens. Tiny figures darted in and out of the kennels, the forge, the maester's turret. Robb's red hair glinted in the yard below as he lunged toward Jon. Bran let the wind wash over him. It howled in his ears like a living thing. And then he heard it. Not the wind. Something else. Caw. A black bird sat on the chimney stack nearby, head cocked. Its eyes were beady, its feathers sleek and sharp. Bran edged toward it, holding his hand out flat. The raven watched him, unmoving. "What do you know?" Bran asked it. The bird blinked once, then twice. Bran took another step. Snap! His boot caught a cracked slate. He slipped, just slightly, but it was enough to send him skidding to the edge. And then Summer was there, bounding up from the window ledge he had no business reaching. The direwolf snarled, seized the hem of Bran's cloak in his teeth, and yanked him back to safety. They collapsed in a heap, boy and wolf, panting. Bran laughed. Not the quiet kind, but a full, giddy shout that echoed down the tower. The raven was gone, firelight and fathers. That night, by the fire, Catelyn sewed by the hearth while Rickon gurgled on a blanket nearby. Sansa combed Arya's hair with long, slow strokes. Her lips pressed in a flat line the whole time. "Careful!" Arya hissed, jerking forward. "It wouldn't tangle if you didn't wrestle like a kennel pup." Bran sat on a bearskin rug, drawing crude towers in the ash with a stick. Summer lay curled beside him, tail flicking with dreams. Ned Stark entered silently and poured himself a cup of spiced wine. "Did you see the rookery again?" Catelyn asked without looking up. Bran hesitated. "Yes," she sighed. "It's too dangerous. You're not a bird," Bran looked down. "But I'm not afraid." Catelyn set down her needle and cupped his chin, gentle but firm. "Bravery is not about never being afraid, Brandon. It's about what you do when you are—" Bran didn't answer. Ned sat beside them, gazing into the fire. "Does the wind ever whisper to you, father?" Bran asked. The question came so suddenly that the entire room fell silent. Even Rickon paused, as if waiting for the answer. Ned turned, his face half in shadow. "Every day," he said at last. But not everyone listens. Bran nodded slowly, the thought wrapping around him like a blanket. Final line. Outside, the night wind howled across the battlements, but in Bran's room the only sound was the soft scraping of chalk as he traced towers onto his wall, eyes alight with things no one else could see. Chapter 5. The Ghosts in the Snow. The Turning Wind. Winterfell slept under a hush of falling snow, the kind that silenced footsteps and softened even the harshest stone. Bran stirred before the dawn horn blew, rousing in the cold under his furs, with the peculiar sense that the world had changed slightly in the night, like something had shifted while no one was watching. The wind had changed direction. He swung his legs out from beneath his blanket, found his boots in the dark, and slipped them on without making a sound. The servants would be slow to stir today. Heavy snow did that, made men lazy and quiet. But Bran was neither. He moved like a shadow across the nursery floor, past Rickon's crib, where the babe snorted in his sleep, fists curled tight in dreams. Bran paused just long enough to brush his fingers against the carved wolf at the crib's footboard before slipping out. The halls were his playground, his battleground, his sky, the mother's fear. Catelyn Stark's fear wasn't the type you screamed about. It lived in her stomach like iron and whispered from the corners of Winterfell's towers. She stood in the solar, staring through the frost-streaked windows, watching the faint dot of her sun disappear into the teeth of the north wind. He was 6 now, tall for his age, curious, tireless, and utterly possessed by a madness she didn't understand. "I should have never told him the story of the winged knight," she murmured. Maester Luwin, seated beside the hearth with his parchment and ink, looked up. "My lady, nothing," she said quickly, but her fingers dug into her shawl. "He climbs everything. If it has a stone, he scales it. Ned thinks it will teach him courage. But there are other ways to learn courage than to throw yourself into the sky." Luwin gave her a kindly, measured look. "There's a fire in Brandon that does not smother easily. Even fear may only feed it." She didn't reply. Not to him. Not to anyone. But in her heart she'd seen the vision already. Broken bones on cobblestone, blood, snow, silence. Lessons with Robb and Jon. The training yard echoed with clashing swords, grunts, and Theon's ever-present laugh. Robb was mid-swing when Jon parried with a twist of the wrist that sent his half-brother skidding. "Better!" Sir Roderick called from the sidelines, one gloved hand on his beard. "But you led too heavily with your front foot. That would have gotten you gutted in the field. Would have gotten him gutted anywhere," Theon added with a smirk, tossing a snowball that exploded harmlessly on Jon's shoulder. Bran watched from the scaffolding above, boots hanging over the edge of the armory roof. He kept his breath even and his body still, just as Jon had taught him. He admired Jon most when he was quiet, when he listened more than he spoke, fought with grace rather than fury, and walked the line between wolf and shadow. After the lesson, Jon tilted his head up toward him. "You coming down or waiting for the snows to melt?" "I can see the rookery from here," Bran called back, "and the stables, and my patience growing thin." Bran grinned. "Race you to the library wall. I'd rather not watch your mother skin me alive." The climb in secret. That night, the keep was nearly silent. Fires dimmed low. Servants tucked into bed. Even the direwolf slept, Ghost in his usual curl at Jon's feet, grey wind stretched beside Robb like a watchful guardian. Bran slipped from his chamber in worn leathers and mitts, scarf tucked tight around his throat. He passed the sleeping guards with practiced silence. By now, they barely tracked him. He didn't go for the usual routes. Instead, he entered the first keep, the oldest and most crumbling tower of Winterfell. It had been boarded once, years ago, but he'd found a new way in through a collapsed stairwell and a forgotten pantry. The stones inside were older than his dreams. The place whispered. It welcomed him. He scaled the side like a spider, fingers gripping the cracks, eyes searching for handholds even in the dark. Snow dusted his shoulders, clung to his lashes. He didn't mind. He loved the stillness up high. He stopped near the bell arch, a favourite perch, and sat in the silence. That's when he heard it. A voice. Whisper soft. "Climb higher, boy." He spun, heart in his throat. Nothing. Only the snow. Only the wind. Flashback. Ned and the first climb. Bran remembered his very first climb. Not the steps or handholds, but the feel of his father's hand closing around his wrist just as he slipped. He was 4. He'd tried to scale the ice cellar wall, and he'd made it halfway before the stones betrayed him. He'd dangled there for just a second, weightless, helpless, before his father yanked him back. Ned Stark hadn't shouted. He'd said nothing at all, in fact, only knelt with Bran on the stone floor until the boy's breath calmed. Then he'd said one sentence. Never forget the fall is always waiting. But even then, Bran only remembered how he'd gone back the next day. Climbed again. Higher this time. Arya and the Game of Faces. Bran's second favourite person was Arya. She didn't talk like a girl. She didn't laugh when he fell in the mud. She asked real questions and swung sticks like swords. They were under the kitchens, hiding near the heat vents, when Arya asked, "What's it like? Climbing that high?" Bran thought. "Like flying." "Except no wings," she nodded. "Do you see ghosts?" He blinked. "What? I think the broken tower is haunted. I saw a face once. At night." Bran hesitated. "Then I heard something too. A voice." Arya leaned in. "What did it say? Climb higher." Arya didn't laugh, just frowned. "Then I better come with you next time, the North Wind's secret." Back at the top of the first keep, the wind howled louder. Bran pulled his scarf tighter, but stayed. He loved it here. The solitude, the view, the way the rest of Winterfell looked small and manageable. Jon joined him again. He didn't say much, just tossed him a crust of bread and sat beside him. "You don't think it's strange?" Bran asked. "What? That I never fall—" Jon looked at him sideways. "Not yet." Bran frowned. "Why not? I've slipped. Lost my grip. Almost fell from the Rookery Tower last week. Maybe the gods hold you up. Or maybe I'm just lucky." Jon smirked faintly. "Luck runs out." Bran looked away. "Not mine." A long silence. Then Jon said softly, "You're not afraid of dying?" "No!" "I am." Bran looked up. Jon rarely spoke that way. "Vulnerable. Real." "I don't think about dying," Bran said finally. "I think about flying. The dream returns." That night, Bran dreamed of the raven again. Not the usual one. This one had 3 eyes. It circled the tower, cawing once, twice, and then landed on his shoulder. "You climb," it said in a voice that echoed in his bones, "because the ground doesn't deserve you." Bran woke with a gasp. Outside, snow still fell, and in the corner of the room near the frost-laced window, a thin trail of black feathers melted into nothing. In the weirwood shadow, he found Sansa near the heart tree the next morning, whispering prayers. She looked up when she heard his boots crunching snow. "You scared me. Sorry." She studied him. "You look different. I had a dream about falling. No, about flying." Sansa didn't laugh. She seemed older somehow, her red cloak drawn tight, and a sad softness in her eyes. "I had a dream once," she said, "that we were all birds." "Except Theon was a peacock," Bran smiled. "Of course he was—" They stood in silence. Then Sansa added, "Be careful, little brother. I always am." "No, you're not." And then she turned and left, her footprints delicate and even in the snow. The final whisper. That evening he climbed again. Higher this time? The snow was heavier, the wind colder. The stones beneath his fingers felt brittle and ancient. But still he climbed, over moss-slick ledges, around chimneys, past windows. He was a shadow. At the highest perch of the bell tower he paused. The whole of Winterfell lay below, dwarfed, small, his kingdom. And then the whisper returned. "Climb higher. Boy, it wasn't wind. It wasn't a dream. It came from inside the stone." And Bran Stark smiled. He would obey. "Final line. Climb higher, boy," the voice had whispered. And Brandon Stark would never stop climbing. Chapter 6. the wall with no end. Snow fell like whispers from the sky, soft and endless. Winterfell had quiet moods like this, when the wind stilled and the cold pressed down not with fury but with patience. The kind of cold that didn't bite all at once, but crept in over time and settled deep into your bones. Bran loved the snow. It made everything more interesting. The courtyards were blank canvases waiting for boot prints. The towers wore cloaks of white. The ravens made sharp black dashes across a sky that looked carved from ice. More than that, snow quieted everything else. The castle stones echoed his footfalls louder. The creak of wood and the moan of old hinges became clearer. It felt like Winterfell whispered when no one else was listening. He was 7 now, taller, quicker, leaner. His boots fit tighter and his hands had grown calloused from gripping stone and wood. The boy who used to cling to the stable beams now walked the edge of rooftops. He no longer hesitated at the sight of frost-glazed ledges. Climbing had become his language, each stone a word, each ledge a phrase. On this morning, he climbed the broken parapets above the training yard. He crouched low, hidden by snow-draped merlons, and peered down at Robb and Jon sparring below. Both were bundled in leather and fur, their swords ringing in the crisp air. Theon stood with arms crossed, smirking every time Jon slipped. "Try hitting him like you mean it, Snow." Bran grinned. Robb was faster, but Jon was cleverer. He liked watching them. Their rhythm, their sweat turning to steam, the way they moved like dancers, blades singing against each other. Sometimes Bran pretended he was a knight, standing atop the Red Keep, about to dive into battle. Below him, Arya scampered across the yard, chasing Nymeria with a stick and yelling at Rickon to stop eating the snow. Sansa stood under the archway, bored, her arms folded as Septa Mordain lectured her about posture. Jon spotted Bran on the roof and called up, "Climb down before your mother sees you." "I'm not going to fall," Bran shouted. "You say that every time," Robb added, laughing. Bran only waved, then disappeared from view. Inside the great hall, warmth radiated from the hearth and smelled of roasted carrots and mutton fat. Catelyn sat stitching a raven in black thread onto a pale blue banner. Her fingers moved with precision, but her eyes flicked to the windows every few minutes. He was on the roof again. Sansa tattled, glancing up from her embroidery with a sigh. "Like a spider." "Of course he was," Catelyn murmured. "He's always on the roof." "He said he was going to find a way into the tower with no stairs," Arya said, sliding into the room behind her sister. Catelyn stiffened. "What tower? The one with the ravens that won't fly away," Arya said with a shrug. "He said there's a locked door and a bird that watches him." "I think he's making it up." Ned entered just as the fire snapped. "He's not making it up," he said quietly. Catelyn's brows pulled together. "You knew. I've seen him climbing near it." "The old Raven Tower. It was sealed before I was born. Then he has no business near it. He's careful. He's a child. He's a Stark." They exchanged a look. Equal parts love and frustration, both of them too tired to argue. Outside, the snow thickened. Winter wasn't just coming. It was already here. That evening, Bran crept through the godswood under cover of dusk. The snow was fresh, and the trees looked like pale ghosts, their limbs draped in white. The heart tree's red eyes watched him pass as if judging him. He made his way to the ancient wall, part of a collapsed stairwell. The stones were old, dark, moss-eaten, crumbling in some places, but he'd studied the angles for weeks. If he could wedge his foot in the cracked lintel, then reach for the frost-coated drainpipe, he could find a path up. There was no sky he wouldn't climb. He looked up. The tower loomed like a forgotten god, its top lost in swirling flakes. Bran began to climb. The stones were slick, but he moved with purpose. His breath turned to clouds. A wrong move meant a broken arm. A slip could mean worse. But he'd learned to fall properly, bend the knees, roll the shoulders, twist the body. Halfway up, his boot slipped, scraping ice. He clenched his teeth, held tight, and caught himself. One moment of silence, then a breath, then another hold, another pull. Finally, he reached the top and swung a leg over. He crouched there, panting. The snow danced in golden torchlight. All of Winterfell stretched beneath him like a painting. Rooftops and towers outlined in snow, warm light flickering in the windows, direwolf tracks zigzagging through courtyards. Then he turned. There it was, the Raven Tower, a sealed door, a rusted hinge, and a single raven perched atop the archway. Its feathers shimmered with the frost. Its eyes weren't black. They glowed faint blue, impossibly blue, like the heart of a glacier. Bran froze. The raven did not caw. It simply watched. He stepped forward, hands slowly outstretched. "Hello?" The raven blinked once. Then it opened its wings, wider than seemed possible, and launched into the air. It spiraled above him once, then vanished into the swirling snow. Bran stood there for a long time, breathing hard, unsure if he'd imagined the whole thing. The next morning, Ned found Bran already awake by the fire. "You're up early? Didn't sleep much?" Ned sat beside him, watching the flames. "I climbed the tower," Bran said quietly. "I figured there was a raven. Winterfell has many. This one had blue eyes." Ned paused. "Did it speak to you?" "No." "Good." They sat in silence for a while. Bran stared into the fire. Ned stared at his son. "Climb where it's safe, Bran. But the view's not as good." "You're not a bird." Bran smiled faintly. "Not yet." Final line. Later that day, he stood in the godswood again, staring at the sealed tower, and whispered into the snow, "I'll climb it again. And next time, I won't stop at the door." Chapter 7. Wings of the Watcher. The snow fell thicker now, soaking into the stone and seeping beneath Brandon's clothes before he could scurry high enough to escape the worst of it. Winterfell's towers were all ancient and grey, but the tallest ones, the broken tower and the first keep, seemed older than the sky itself. Brandon had never reached their tops, not yet, but today he had another target. Maester Luwin's rookery, perched atop the central tower behind the great hall, was ringed with nesting cages, barred slits, and the sharp clatter of ravens that had seen too much. Brandon had spent many nights in the library hearing tales of those birds, how they flew to the Eyrie, to Castle Black, even to the Wall and beyond. Today he'd see the rookery from the outside. He told no one. Not Robb, not Arya, and definitely not Sansa, who had tattled after his last adventure when he climbed the bell tower and got stuck for 2 hours until Theon found him. That morning, Brandon pulled on his boots and gloves before the sun rose. The courtyard was dead silent. Smoke curled lazily from the kitchens, and only one guard stood watch at the southern gate, half asleep with his cloak pulled over his face. Brandon stuck close to the shadows until he reached the outer wall. From there, he scaled the narrow ledge to the second-floor overhang and used a crooked drainpipe to launch himself toward the rookery's wall. His fingers stung with cold. His feet slipped once, but he found his grip again. He climbed like the wind was watching. Inside the castle, Ned sat with Maester Luwin, poring over a letter sealed in red wax. Catelyn stood behind him, eyes narrowing. "You're worried?" she said plainly. "The Lannisters are quiet." "Too quiet," Ned muttered. Jon Arryn wrote of whispers. Gold shifting hands, knives unsheathed before the blade is drawn. "He's dead now." Ned didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward the open window. "And I keep dreaming of Brandon. Our son, my brother." Catelyn laid a hand on his shoulder. Ned rose, the wind catching his cloak. "And yet, I worry most for our little climber." Robb and Jon were in the training yard, sparring with wooden blades, watched by Theon Greyjoy, who leaned lazily on a pike. "He's probably trying to find the dragon eggs again." Theon smirked. "They're just painted rocks." Arya piped up from the hay bale, bored and scowling. "I could find better treasure than Bran." "You wouldn't even make it past the stables," Sansa said, arms folded. "Lady wouldn't let you." Arya rolled her eyes. "Lady's a wolf, not a lady." They all turned at once when they heard the distant shriek of a raven echo down the tower. Atop the rookery, Brandon clung to the ledge, inches from the iron cage where a raven watched him, unmoving. It tilted its head, as if curious. "Are you the one that flies to the wall?" he whispered, voice trembling from cold and awe. The raven didn't call. It stepped closer. Bran smiled. "You're not afraid of me." Another gust of wind. His fingers slipped, but he recovered. Below, from the rookery window, Maester Luwin's voice bellowed. "Bran! What in the seven hells are you doing?" Bran jumped in surprise, lost his grip, and tumbled, but only for a breath. His hand caught the edge of the cage. He dangled for a moment, heart thundering. The raven fluttered to the ledge beside him. Then came another voice. Quiet, not from below, from above. "You're not ready yet," it said. Bran looked up. No one was there, only falling snow. He climbed back down without a word. That night, as the torches were lit and supper served in the great hall, Ned stood behind Brandon as he sat quietly eating, unusually tame. "Climb again without telling someone," Ned said calmly, "and I'll have the gates chained with dragon steel." Brandon looked up, innocent as ever. "Even the one behind the broken tower?" Ned stared at him a long moment. "Especially that one." Catelyn gave Ned a long look. "You encourage him. He's a Stark. It's in his blood. In the rookery, the raven with glowing eyes sat unmoving. It didn't eat. It didn't blink. Maester Luwin stared at it that evening, frowning. "Where did you come from, then?" The bird didn't answer. Final line. That night, Brandon dreamed of towers taller than mountains, and eyes that watched him from beyond the snow. Chapter 8. The Hidden Paths. Bran Stark had always known that the walls of Winterfell held secrets. He just hadn't known how many until he started discovering them, one careful footstep at a time. At 8 years old, Bran's confidence was unshakable. He climbed every day now. Not just towers, but balconies, gargoyles, and abandoned battlements. The castle was a maze with stories woven into every stone, and Bran chased them like a hound after a scent. "You shouldn't go alone anymore," Jon told him one cold morning by the practice yard, his breath misting in the air. "One slip, one bad frost. You could be—" "I never fall," Bran said, brushing snow from the ledge where he'd landed after scaling the kitchen roof. Jon sighed. "You never have. Doesn't mean you won't." They walked the outer ring together in silence, Jon's direwolf ghost padding behind them like a silent shadow. Bran always liked walking with Jon. Robb made everything into a contest, and Theon made everything about Theon. But Jon just listened, watched, thought. "Have you ever wondered what's beyond the walls?" Bran asked. Jon looked up. "You mean the ones in your mind, or the ones made of stone?" Bran blinked at him. Jon always said things like that. That evening, Bran found a new way up the broken tower, not the usual footholds and cracks, but a slim passage between the tower and a storage wall. It was barely wide enough for his shoulders. He wedged himself in and began the climb, inching higher into shadow and wind. Halfway up, he discovered a hidden landing, a hollow between old stones where someone had once tucked away a carving of a direwolf. The edges were worn smooth by weather and time, but the Stark sigil still held its form. Someone long ago had left it there. Watching, Bran sat beside it, legs dangling, and felt the wind whip past his boots. He wasn't alone. Arya had followed him. "You're going to fall, and Father's going to blame me," she said, chin resting on the edge of the stone. Bran just grinned. "Then don't get caught." They stayed there for an hour, Arya pulling bits of bread from her pocket, sharing with Bran and even tossing a crumb to a crow watching them from a crooked iron pipe. The bird stared at them, then cawed once, as if in approval, and flapped away across the rooftops. Later that night, Catelyn found Arya's cloak missing and Bran's bed untouched. She stormed through the halls in near panic, but when Maester Luwin finally spotted them descending from the tower's edge, Arya with messy hair and a scraped knee, Bran smiling like he'd touched the moon, Catelyn froze. Her heart warred between fury and awe. Ned, who had come running with sword in hand, simply looked at his son and said nothing. Later, when the children were ushered to bed, Ned placed a hand on Bran's shoulder and whispered, "You see things up there others don't. But just remember, some views aren't worth the fall." Bran nodded, though he didn't entirely agree. Days passed. Bran found more hidden paths, gutters wide enough to climb, windows forgotten by builders, tunnels beneath the Great Hall. He was becoming more ghost than boy, known only to cats and crows. Arya followed sometimes. So did Rickon once, but only until he got his head stuck and wailed like a pup. Robb didn't understand. Sansa didn't care. Theon scoffed, but Jon always noticed. One morning, Bran woke to find a thick rope coiled at the base of the bell tower with a note tied to it. Every great man climbs higher with help. Jon. Bran smiled and tied it to his belt. One evening after supper, while everyone else drifted toward their chambers or the firelight of the Great Hall, Bran returned to the Godswood alone. The snow had fallen softly, muting the world. The weirwood tree loomed like a ghost, its red eyes watching. He sat cross-legged in front of it and closed his eyes. Why do I climb? He wondered. Was it the thrill, the view, the feeling of being above everything? No, it was the silence, the clarity. The moment between foot and hand when the world faded and it was just him and the stones. Bran felt alive when he climbed. Not just alive. Right. He heard a soft crunch behind him and turned to see Jon approaching. You always come here after a big climb? Jon asked. Bran shrugged. I like the tree. It never moves, but it sees everything, Jon chuckled. Sounds familiar. They sat together in silence, Ghost settling beside them. You'll climb higher than any of us ever will, Jon said at last, brushing snow from Bran's shoulder. Just promise me one thing. Bran turned. When you find the highest tower, look down. Remember the rest of us. That night, Bran couldn't sleep. The snowstorm had passed, leaving a thick, shimmering crust on every roof and wall. Moonlight lit the castle like silver. It was the perfect night. He rose from his bed, dressed silently, and slipped into the courtyard. His eyes found it, the tower with the barred windows, the one no one spoke of, the one with secrets behind stone. He took a deep breath. It would be his next climb. Final line, and nothing, not snow, not warning, not fear, would stop him. Not when he was this close to flying. Chapter 9. The Whispering Tower. The air in Winterfell had changed. It wasn't just the deepening cold of winter's approach, or the howl of the wind that blew in from the wolfswood. It was something else. Something more silent. A heaviness. A hush. As if the stones of the castle themselves were bracing for a truth not meant to be heard. Brandon Stark had been climbing again. Not just once. Not just secretly. But obsessively. His boots had long been discarded. He climbed barefoot now, for better grip. He'd learned the paths across Winterfell's towers the way a bard learns verses. Each route memorized, each foothold etched in his bones. By age 10, Bran knew every ledge, every handhold, every hidden crevice of the keep. He could scale the broken bell tower in under a minute. He could cross the Godswood rooftop by moonlight. He could perch like a crow on the highest point of the rookery without a whisper of noise. He felt like the castle was his now. Yet with each climb, a darker kind of curiosity had taken root. Something whispered to him from the towers. Not with words, but with secrets. With moments he wasn't meant to see. Conversations half caught. Glances that lingered too long between adults who wore masks in the daylight. He'd seen the maester burn letters at night. He'd seen old Nan speak to crows that answered. And now, he had seen something else. It was near dusk when it happened. Bran had taken the long route, climbing from the southern library to the high turret of the broken tower. His hands were numb with cold, his fingers raw, but he moved with practiced ease. He was chasing the last light of the day, hoping to catch a view of the world turning pink and gold above the frost-covered walls. Instead, he found whispers. The window had been slightly ajar. He heard voices before he saw the faces, familiar ones. A woman and a man, arguing, but not like his mother and father argued, not with sharp words and distance. This was closer than it should be. He leaned forward, barely breathing. Queen Cersei stood near the fire, dressed not in her court silks but in a loose robe of crimson velvet. Her golden hair spilled like sunlight over her shoulders. Sir Jamey stood beside her, tense, angry, and something else. Protective, possessive. The firelight flickered over their faces as they spoke in low, urgent tones. Bran didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. A hand slipped into another, A touch lingered too long. Their shadows danced across the wall like two lovers caught in a flame. He drew back instinctively, too suddenly. His foot caught a loose stone. The world lurched sideways. For the first time in all his climbing, Bran lost his balance. A raven shrieked above him as he scrambled, heart racing, arms flailing for a grip. He caught the ledge with his fingertips just in time, dangling, breathless. From inside the tower, the voices had gone silent. And then, the window creaked open wider. A face appeared. Sir Jamey's. His golden hair was tousled. His eyes met Bran's, wide, startled, then narrowing in an instant. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Bran opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain he meant nothing by it. But Jamey was already moving. The Kingslayer stepped into the window frame, towering above the boy with a look not of rage, but of decision. A heavy, awful silence hung between them. He saw us, Cersei's voice came from behind, low and trembling. Jamey looked back at her, then at Bran. For a moment, something like regret flickered in his eyes. Then he reached forward. Bran never screamed. "Final line, the things I do for love," Jamey whispered, before he pushed. Chapter 10. The Fall. The broken tower loomed against the morning sky like a silent giant. Its crumbling face etched with shadows and ice. Snow fell lightly, casting Winterfell in a white hush that muffled footfalls and softened the world. But inside Brandon Stark there was no stillness. There was only fire. Bran's fingers tingled as he hung from the wooden beams outside the library, daring himself to climb higher, farther, faster than ever before. He was 10 years old now, no longer the wide-eyed toddler who took his first steps in the Godswood. He had become the ghost in Winterfell's towers, the shadow on the rooftops, a boy who climbed better than any man walked. Below him, the castle bustled in miniature. Arya dashed across the courtyard, stick-sword in hand, chasing Rickon who had stolen her glove. Robb sparred with Jon in the yard, wooden blades clacking in rhythm. Theon leaned against the wall nearby, offering unhelpful commentary with smug amusement. Bran didn't call out. He never did. The heights were his alone. Today he wasn't merely climbing for mischief. He was hunting a rumour. The stable boy had whispered that strange sounds had echoed from the broken tower the night before. Voices where none should be. A woman's laughter where only ravens roosted. That was all it took. Curiosity burned hotter than fear. Bran had to know. He scaled the stones like they were part of him. The chill cut into his fingers, but he barely noticed. His feet found holds as if by instinct. The tower narrowed as he climbed, the wind picking up, tugging at his cloak. Near the top, a narrow window jutted out, a place he'd never reached before. The voices came again. Muffled, urgent. Bran pressed himself flat, heart pounding. Inside the window, shadows moved. He peered carefully. 2 figures. Golden hair gleamed in the firelight. Sir Jamey Lannister, Lion of the Kingsguard, stood shirtless, too close to. Queen Cersei. Bran's breath caught. The Queen and her brother, together, twined in a way that sent confusion, shame, and instinctive dread crawling up his spine. He gasped. The sound was soft, but not soft enough. Jamey turned first, eyes going wide. He moved faster than a swordsman should in bare feet, crossing the chamber in a blur. Bran tried to pull away from the window, to climb down, to disappear into stone, but Jamey was already there. Their eyes met. One golden, one blue. Jamey looked. Conflicted. Trapped. For the first time, Bran saw something in the knight's face that wasn't arrogance or charm. It was fear, or was it duty, or something worse? Behind him, Cersei whispered. He saw us. Jamey rested one hand on the windowsill. Then he looked down at the boy. Bran's voice trembled. I'm sorry, I didn't see anything. I won't tell... Jamey Lannister's face hardened. The things I do for love. He pushed. The wind howled louder than Bran's scream. Stone scraped his fingers as he slipped. The world flipped. For a heartbeat, time shattered. Bran's arms flailed, legs kicked, breath froze, and then nothing. Final line. Brandon Stark fell from the tower like a leaf torn from its branch, and the boy who climbed was gone. Epilogue. A mother's instinct. Winterfell had gone still since the fall. The laughter of children had faded into whispers, and the warmth of hearths now did little to thaw the chill that had settled deep in Catelyn Stark's bones. She hadn't left Bran's bedside in 9 days. Her boy, her wild little dreamer, always climbing, always reaching, now lay motionless, his chest rising and falling with the breath of borrowed hope. And then came the assassin. Steel in the dark. A dagger meant for her son. Only Summer's feral lunge had saved them both. The wolf had bled and howled, but Catelyn had felt something colder than blood spill in that room. A truth unspoken. A threat far greater than mere accident. She had turned then, no longer just a grieving mother, but a Stark of Winterfell with fire in her veins. Someone wanted her boy dead, not fallen, silenced. That dagger, Valyrian steel, richly adorned, did not belong to a mere cutthroat. And so, as the snows thickened and the shadows lengthened over the castle, Catelyn began to ask questions that no mother should have to ask. Who would kill a sleeping child? What did Bran see before he fell? And what secrets hide behind the cold stone of the broken tower? She would find the answers, even if it meant riding to King's Landing herself. Even if it meant war. And so, the boy who climbed fell. But this was never the end, only the beginning of Brandon Stark's true journey. From the shadows of Winterfell to the mysteries beyond the wall, his fall would awaken powers older than time. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the quiet years before the storm, leave a like, share with fellow fans, and subscribe for more tales from Westeros. This has been Brandon Stark, The Boy Who Climbed, a Game of Thrones story, written by Brian M. Brumbaugh, narrated by Rory Smith. Vala Morgulis, and thanks for watching.